Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are. I hope you're having a fantastic day. And I want to talk to you guys about a video that everybody's been asking me to do one of, and it's based off of a team that's basically all rares for Phantom Shoguns 25. Now, before I go any further into talking about the breakdown of this team, I want to give a special nod to someone that I got inspiration from, which was BioHack. I believe he has a YouTube video on YouTube, so I want to make sure we give credit where credit's due before I go anywhere, and give a special nod to his video. I'll have it in the description and somewhere right here so you can see his little thumbnail so you know which one I'm talking about. But with that being said, why Phantom Shogun? So I've been pushing a little bit more and more recently into trying to dive into higher end content for like PvP, and amongst some of those champions I use are like characters like, for example, Necrit, right? And Necrit's build, as I inject more and more life into it, has really starting to pay off. And I've been trying to find like more and more ways to like include better stats and better value so that whenever he's doing his thing in arena, for example, or in other content for that matter too, he's able to really like make a difference. And believe it or not, like even if they ban someone, like I normally go with like a combo of Duchess and Necrit, for example. If they ban my Duchess with Necrit in play, I still am a menace to society, which is really, really cool to see. So you know, being able to hit some of these stats depending on your gear and whatnot, I don't have the luxury of being able to have like the most best pieces for like a late game account. I think I'm probably on the lower end side when it comes to like gear value. And champions for that matter, to be honest. But with that being said, as I've been working more and more towards like to improve that, to make that gap a little bit closer for like my counterparts, my opposition, basically anybody that I'm going against, I want to make sure I improve my gear ever so slightly so it's a little bit better. Now, looking at areas, like I find a couple good pieces, the next thing you know, I oil them all the way through, and then I hit a certain like plateau. It's like, okay, well that's where I can go at with this piece for right now. You know, besides, you know, glyphing and all that stuff like that, which is I'm unlucky. I don't know if you guys are, but I'm super unlucky when it comes to like glyphing. So I was like, all right, well then how do I bridge the gap even more? You know what I mean? How do I get a step closer? And then my answer was like, all right, well let's see if we can find some pieces where we can get some extra stats in, and that's where we started looking at like different rings and different accessories. And I was like, you know what? Looking at what you can get from an oil standpoint. Let me find a piece here that may be a little bit more, especially since we got the recent Hydro Clash. You know, we've been starting to get some pieces here. Maybe there'll be some value down the road. But like looking at, depending on the piece you have, there's like some extra stats you can get there. So like if a nuker wanted to get extra attack somewhere, his primary stat or her primary stat, you know, you want to try to see if maybe you can oil into an attack one or defense or HP, depending on whatever the suits you know the needs of your build, right? So I was looking around and I was you know, browsing, and I stumbled upon BioHack's video, and although it was designed specifically for stage 25, there are some caveats towards this build as to why it works or will not work, and I'm going to explain that real quickly. Basically, it is an all-rare team. I so happen to be fortunate enough to have, way before Shoguns was on my radar to focus on, I already had pretty much a 5-star and eventually a 6-star Cold Heart. So it's like, okay, she's automatically going to be an easy auto include. One, because I started taking her out of my other teams because, you know, replacements like G-Nut came into play and whatnot. So I needed a new home for her to thrive in. And considering that, like, in my opinion, Phantom Shoguns, the only thing I don't like about it is that it's a little bit, I don't want to say pay to winish, but like kind of demanding in the sense that the whole mechanic of the shade counter is predicated upon your level of blessing, right? So the higher your blessing, the more shade you remove. And you know, if you haven't seen videos on the breakdown of how this boss works in essence, basically, the shade counter is decreased according to the amount of levels you have on a, you know, whenever they use a skill. So like, as you get higher numbers for your blessing, the more stacks you remove, and you want to maintain him being under a specific set of, you know, shade counters, because if the more he gets, the more he starts mitigating. So he starts ignoring % defense, or you know, enemy max HP hits, or he starts ignoring unkillable and all these other things that would help you get through the fight. So maintaining that shade counter is pretty much the key to Phantom Shoguns, right? So the main way we're going to do it, and I'm going to show you the run shortly after I show you the build. The main premise of this is that we use someone like Gnarlhorn, who is basically our enfeeblement tank. The way that it works is that he primarily targets the one who has the highest crit damage. So we built Gnarlhorn to have higher crit damage, and then of course we scaled everybody else a little bit lower under him so that he would be the primary target. And then on top of that too, because he's enfeebled, whenever they do weak hits or any type of weak hits happen, you will increase his counter. So with someone like Gnarlhorn, who his A1 cannot be a strong, critical, or a weak hit, it'll just be a normal hit, which is what we want. we ignored that part of the mechanic for the enfeeblement tank section. So he was a great contribution in that regard. And I so happened to get lucky to get one star blessing on him, right? Now, if he's only A1ing, how do we keep unkillable on him? Well, that's where Paragon comes into play. And the way that this team is designed, the team is designed to basically enable at least some champions to go what's called like a ratio of like, you know, whenever the boss goes, you know, your team goes. They kind of go like a 4-3 ratio where he's able to basically do damage with our fastest DPS, which in this case is going to be Cold Heart number 1. To do an extra turn in between, whereas like the previous build, which is where I got my inspiration from BioHack, was originally like a 1-1 build. And we basically turned that into going a little bit faster and allowing us to get a couple more hits in, which ultimately brings the shade counter down to a respectable level where we don't have to worry about it anymore. Then I got the Reliquary Tender blessing because I was originally going to use Mithrala. And that pretty much just guaranteed me, it's like, you know what, we're going to build Reliquary up for this, and it'll be an all-rare team. And that's what ended up becoming of it, right? Outside of the speeds, the main thing is just having blessings. That's the two key things that we have to take from everything I've been saying so far. But with that being said, Gnawhorn is going at a respectable 183 speed. Another important consideration is that he needs to be tanky enough to survive the first hit. So I actually found that like around 3k defense and 67 HP is way more than enough. As a matter of fact, I feel very comfortable that this is a 100% success rate. I've actually been doing this for a while now in terms of running this composition. And it has yet to fail since I found the right speeds for it. So, one thing I will note is that like the HP threshold for some of the other champions are actually going to be kind of important for you to avoid another portion of the mechanic, which we'll explain as we go along. But anyways, we have Paragon at a solid 175 speed. He is at 41.8k HP. I think everybody's HP in this particular comp has a little bit of an importance. It's like a keynote. It's not just the speeds. It's not just Gnawhorn's defense. It's everybody's HP in total needs to be at a certain range to avoid splash over damage, and I'll explain in a little bit. Reliquary Tender is probably the hardest part about this build because she has to be kind of in line to enable her to go immediately at a certain point, and so that she doesn't get lapped, and so that she actually has her cooldown at the right appropriate time. Basically, the way it's going to go is the boss is going to get his turn. Reliquary will go right afterwards. We'll do a throwaway ability, which is like her A1. And the most important part of her kit, which will cycle into the next turn, will be when the boss does a AoE enfeeblement debuff to the entire team. Remember, enfeeblement causes us to do weak hits. Weak hits cause the shade counter to go up. The shade counter causes him to ignore everything we do. So we want to avoid that. And as a result of that, having a 3-turn cooldown cleanser in some capacity is the most important thing. I will say, I thought about using like Doom Priest since I have like a level 6 blessing on her. Unfortunately, I use it for my clan boss team, so I didn't want to do that. But I thought that maybe a cool nod may be to consider something like that. I'm not sure if we get rid of the enfeeblement first, but I'll explain down the road when we're in the middle of the run. For the most part, an AoE cleanser on a 3-turn cooldown is what you need for the most part, and the rest is kind of history from there, right? Paragon will keep basically giving unkillable to the primary target, and that's why Gnawhorn's in the priority. He's in the lead role. He'll typically give it to the one with the lowest HP, and since Gnawhorn's the one mainly taking the damage, that's the key right there. And we go at a speed where both Gnawhorn and Paragon are lapped appropriately, so that whenever Gnawhorn is losing the unkillable, Paragon's applying it just before the boss goes, right? Then, of course, you have your DPSs. This one's a little bit more easier to do as you progress in the game. 246, 245, pretty respectable. Now, mind you, I actually pulled down my crit damage numbers to make sure that it fits in line with Gnawhorn. Gnawhorn and Reliquary Tender are pretty much the two builds that are probably the hardest in this entire comp. Gnawhorn needs to be able to do 183, which isn't difficult, but high crit damage, and then basically a combination of defense and HP to keep himself alive for the initial hit. And then Reliquary Tender, the hard part about her is the speed on top of having decent HP. So finding that balance right there was the difficult thing. Now, there were some thresholds that I did try to do. I tried to go as far as like 179. I had some failures there. Same thing with like 185, 186-ish, and I started seeing some issues with like consistency of being able to land the bus at the appropriate time. So I would say that for right now, because I haven't tested any ranges too much for those three champions, which is the Gnawhorn, Paragon, and Reliquary Tender, they're pretty much a hard lock speed range, I would say. Like, try to stay as close as you can to 183, try to stay as close as you can to 175, and of course, Reliquary Tender, I think you can't go no lower than 284. I don't think you can go too much higher either. I think like maybe one extra speed or maybe two extra speeds at most, but I would say try to stay at like 284, 285. The cold hearts, on the other hand, which can be any DPS, mind you, it doesn't have to be a cold heart. It can be literally any DPS, as long as you got the highest blessing for cold heart taken care of there, you're pretty much good to go. Or the highest DPS, which in this case is my 6-star cold heart. Let me disappear for a sec so you can see what I'm talking about. Basically, cold heart number 1 is the highest blessing, and so I have her in the faster roll. She gets to go an extra turn before the boss is like 3rd hit. Which will allow you to get the shake counter a little bit down lower. And then, of course, you have 245. I think anything lower than that starts getting a little bit dicey, but I believe you can go up in speeds if you so care to. With that being said, I will say, let's get into a run, and I'll show you exactly what we're talking about. And then I'll talk a little bit more about blessings and about some minimum requirements you're going to need to have so that you kind of be on pace of everything. But let's get into it. Yeah, let's get into it. As it currently stands, what's going to happen is the boss goes first. He's very, very fast at stage 25, right? And you notice, even with a decent amount of HP, he gets kind of low. Now, I think this is the lowest I've ever seen him. Normally, he's got at least a solid, like, maybe 35 to 40% HP, so this is kind of interesting. We do have in the AI set up so that Reliquary Tinner in our first turn, since she goes right after the boss, skips a turn because we're not cleansing anything. This is all protected, right? So her throwaway ability, which is going to be her A1 this round, is going to be that. And then we let the DPSs do their thing. So I open up with Cold Heart since we're trying to get damage and we're trying to be fast. I open up with their A3s immediately so they can start putting it on cooldown and they can get back and cycle into it pretty quickly, right? And even then, I'm not doing like massive amounts of damage. So if you're struggling to get like high crit damage and all that out there, that's not the problem. This team comp is designed to allow you to just take your time and get through it. So I wouldn't worry too much about the output of it if it's too much of a strain on your gear. But the more you can inject into it, the better you're going to be likely to clear it a little bit faster. So it looks like we didn't do as much as we wanted to for our first 2 shots. But Gnarlhorn's just going to A1 the entire time, and pretty much the banger is going to be Paragon giving his unkillable to Gnarlhorn, and then the boss gets his turn. Now, this is where a 3-turn cooldown is going to be important. We get a decreased defense as well as the enfeeblement. Now, I don't really care about the decreased defense because that doesn't really affect us since we have a pretty consistent unkillable enfeeblement target. But the AoEs, or the enfeeblement that everybody has is very, very important because if they start doing stuff, and they start hitting the boss and they're weak hitting, it's just going to shoot his counter up, and then he's going to nuke basically everybody through unkillable and any other requirements. So we have her set to cleanse here as her first priority afterwards, and she cleanses the team. We gain counters here, and that's important to know. Now, because you can get, I'm using my Cold Hearts as an example here, the more hits you do, I believe, the better it is, right? I do avoid the A2, and I just pretty much just use the A1 for the most part. And what you will notice is that on hit, she's automatically dropping down the requirements by like a good 6 or 7. I think it's not on hit, it's basically on use of ability, as long as your blessings are high enough. So you don't have to have multi-hitters, you don't have to have any crazy like that. It's just mostly let's make sure that you hit with, you're hitting without enfeeblement. That's basically the key to it. So Gnarlhorn's going to go ahead and just do his thing. He's going to A1. He brings it down a little bit. Now, Reliquary Tinner having a high level of blessings actually just makes this a little bit more easier. And Paragon has 0 blessings, by the way. So, like, with the overhead on this, you know, he's not bringing the counter down, but he would be able to help keep us, like, basically maintain it almost at 0. But right here is an important note. Our Cold Heart number 1, excuse me, the faster one is able to squeeze in 1 extra turn. That 1 little point of speed makes a difference. And that's what allows us to get that extra turn in, ultimately leading to basically the shade counter going back down to 0. And that's really, really cool to see. At this point, I'm going to let it stay full auto. The main thing that I want to say is that, like, it's tuned to a point where right here, he got lapped in the previous round, and he does lose it this round, but Paragon will get his turn before the boss gets his turn, thankfully, and he will reapply it, thus allowing us to maintain that unkillable. So the way it is tuned is that Gnarlhorn and Paragon will both get lapped, and when the time comes for him to lose his unkillable on Gnarlhorn, Paragon's A2 will be up to basically reapply, and that's the key thing about this tune is that as long as it's maintained there, whenever he does his hit, you ain't got to worry about it. And then, of course, we get the cleanse, and it's a rinse and repeat. It's basically, we're just stalling with unkillable until the Heartseekers get their A3 up again, and then they reapply, and they reshoot, and they reshoot, and then basically the boss eventually dies. Some important considerations. So when I was first climbing up, or when I was first developing this team, I noticed that, like, HP thresholds were kind of a problem. And what would happen is even though I would be able to maintain unkillable and the boss would target the Gnarlhorn, there was some splash damage happening over it, and it would ultimately kill, like, my Cold Hearts actually were the main ones that I noticed it on. And as a result of that, I had to do some groundwork and double check, but it came to find out that's like, I think it's my HP that was a little bit too low. So like it allows splash damage because the threshold wasn't, you know, where you're within range of basically being able to lose a little bit of extra from the boss. The boss will end up doing some sprinkle out damage is what I'll call it. I'm going to show you guys what I consider to be roughly around the bare minimum, I think, or a healthy range from anywhere from this point upwards will keep you from having to worry about the splash out damage that ultimately cost me a couple runs before. But long and short of it, that's pretty much it. You know, maintaining the speed, having a decent health pool for everybody, and then of course having a little bit of extra defense, particularly for someone like your Gnawhorn, so he can tank that first hit before the engine is set up and everybody's able to do what they got to do. But yeah, I mean, overall, I want to say these types of teams go for. Now, mind you, like my cohorts are not the most optimally geared in terms of damage. I use leftover gear. You know, I'm kind of sprinkling a lot of my gear everywhere in terms of a bunch of different compositions and whatnot. So they definitely have a lot of room for improvement, and the more progressive your count is, the better it gets. But I will definitely say that, like, overall, a run for me takes typically anywhere between like 2 minutes to 2.5 minutes tops. At worst, if I'm like really like not getting a lot of damage off, sometimes like they're not hitting as hard or whatever, it may take an extra rotation's worth to get an extra, you know, hard seeker, and that may increase it to like maybe 3 minutes tops. But for the most part, I would say it's roughly around like a 2-minute range, and the boss is down. You know, I took my time running through it, and it kind of goes. My best time, as you can see, is 1:52. So it's not too bad. It is 100% success rate, but I do want to show you guys some caveats about the HP pool, and then we'll go and call it a day. But I believe this one was my weakest. Was it either the 37 or the 35? Let's see here. Oh, 36. So anywhere under 35, I was still having some hit or miss moments. The moment I got above 36.5 to 36.8 KHP is when I started noticing that it stopped happening. Originally, what happened was that she was around like 30K at most, and then I got her up to 37. I pretty much kept it there, and I noticed that like only the Cold Heart number 1 was taking the damage and not the Cold Heart number 2. So I was like, okay, what if I get her closer towards the 37K? So I did a little bit of boost there. I basically sprinkled in some HP glyphs here and there. I actually changed a ring or two to see like if I get a little bit more. And then I found I was like, okay, all right, we're like a 36.8. Let's try it from here again. And then that's what gave me the success rate. So I would argue that in terms of base stat wise, it's around 35, 36.5-ish and higher that you want to get to. I mean, if you take a look at stats here, for the most part, 67K, Paragon sitting at a solid 41K, almost 42K. And my Reliquary Tender, I'm actually surprised. I think it's the banner that really kind of cooked it up for me, but I got to a healthy 64.4 within 284. And I was like, you know what? Enough said. We're done. You know? Now, I am going to show you guys a spreadsheet here that had to do with the BioHack video that I saw. And let me see if I can find it for you guys real quick. I have a copy of it. And basically, the long and short of it is that when you do the combination, when you're running at a 3-4 ratio, you have to have a certain amount of blessings to be able to keep him within a certain range below. If he's at a certain range higher than these numbers here that you'll see, basically this whole 8th row, whatever the number is right above it needs to be higher, or at least that number or higher. So with my cleanser, I'm using a Reliquary Tender who is at a 5-star. My Gnawhorn has a 1-star, and then of course my DPS has a 6-star, and then of course DPS number 2 has 2-star, and then my Paragon has 0. So as you adjust it, they'll have a certain amount of turns and a certain amount of shade reduction that they'll apply per cycle, per ability, basically during their time frame of when they're doing their kit. And what I tried to do is I tried to make sure that I gave myself a little bit extra just in case. I don't know, like I didn't know how consistent this was, and I'm not gonna lie, I got pretty close during the total for my A2s and A3s period in between my cycle, and I was like, you know what, that's a little spicy. But when I got my Reliquary Tender, that was the icing on the cake, and that solidified me having pretty much everything I needed to do. I'll try to include this inside the links in the description below if you want to use this as a point of reference. You can create a copy yourself. But the main thing is, you want to have enough blessings so that whenever you get a per cycle basis, basically a full rotation's worth where you're starting back over from the beginning again, your counter is above 28. And then the total between the A3 and the A2, between the 4-3, or the 3-4 damage deal, excuse me, they have at least a total of 9 or higher, and then of course total post after you do your A2 type ability, it would be basically at least 4 or higher. So all that kind of contributing to making sure you have a certain amount. It is a little demanding, and this is why like Shoguns is kind of difficult for me to like do description of. Is there any replacement? Well, for cleansers, it's 3-turn cleansers. For DPS, it could be any DPS. The only thing I will say is that since this is a speed tomb, you want to avoid champions that have abilities like their A1s that increase turn meter, like Razavarg, for example. You want to avoid those champions because you're trying to stay in sync. I think Paragon's pretty much a hard lock-in, and Gnarlhorn would be a hard lock-in, since they both do what they do very effectively. Since he's a great enfeeblement tank, you want to avoid, you know, weak hits so that you're not adding to the shade counter, and then, of course, Paragon being able to apply an unkillable every 2 turns for a 2-turn duration is pretty much going to be kind of, like, irreplaceable in a sense. So it's basically the Paragon cheese in a way. But literally the DPSs and Reliquary Tender, who's your cleansers, they can be replaced for anybody that has a contributing factor that's equal to what they bring to the table. So 3-turn cooldown, and of course, you know, high blessings. You know, it could be anybody as long as they don't desync the speed tomb, for lack of better words. Anyways, with that being said, I hope this video finds you well. Oh, I did want to talk about progressing. What did I do to get to that point? So I did talk to you guys about different speed ranges. I actually use, for the most part, the concept of this team verbatim all the way up. Now, the difference is that the speeds are different along the way. So this speed tomb will only work at stage 25. I even tried it at 24, and what you will notice, even at the exact speeds that I have them at, I'll run this exact same team. What you will notice is that, like, Reliquary Tender will not be at the perfect time frame of when you need her to be able to cleanse, and the same is also true for, like, the Cold Hearts. I tried to avoid using their abilities, and I'm going to show you here real quickly. Basically, I'm doing everything the same way that I normally would, but what would happen is eventually it would desync, and you would end up experiencing some problems where being able to maintain the counter is pretty much the key here. So what I did was I kind of had my Reliquary Tender, or your Cleanser in this case, I would alter her speeds. I would go up, I would go down, so that she would kind of like follow along in proportion to the boss's speeds. And then I would actually manual my way with Gnarlhorn, because there are some periods where, matter of fact, let me just cycle through abilities here, where he gets his turn here, right? But because Gnarlhorn's going to get his turn and Paragon won't, the unkillable will fall off, and then the boss will go, and then Gnarlhorn dies, and the rest of your team dies, and that's pretty much the run. So what I did to compensate for it was I used his A3 manually whenever I knew that someone like Paragon was not going to make it up. And what I would do here is I would basically just use that as it is. He would keep his unkillable, so the team comp is still running in order. And from there, I would just hold on to Paragon. So it's basically a little bit of a management between Paragon, Gnarlhorn, and Reliquary Tender. And I would just basically try to keep unkillable maintained as best as I could while maintaining the cleanse here at the appropriate time. So if I use the cleanse here right now, what's going to happen is he's going to apply it to everybody somewhere down the road, and I'm not going to have it up. So mainly her with her A1 or using whatever else I can would cause me to lose. Now here's the thing. With Cold Heart having enfeeblement, the more I hit, the more likely it's going to go up. So what I did was I would manual the A2 to try to like keep it as low as I can, and then from there, we would do our best to avoid using like abilities where weak hits are going to be a little bit more likely. So I would use like the A2 during these periods, like since, you know, if you weak hit with your unkillable, it'd be a problem. See how they ended up dying as a result of it? The counter got too high. So what I had to do is I had to adjust my Reliquary Tender speed so that I would at least maybe cut in right where after the first Cold Heart, it would go into Reliquary Tender into Cold Heart number 2. And after the cleanse of Reliquary Tender, the Cold Hearts would start to basically bring the threshold down. But the counter got too high, right? So a lot of it is going to be based off of your ability to just kind of maybe reel in the speeds. As you go downwards from 25, your speed from Reliquary Tender also needs to be adjusted. You can keep Gnarlhorn and Paragon and the Cold Hearts the same speed. The thing is, though, is that you're going to have to manual some of their inputs and basically make it work for the lack of better words. You're going to have to manual and just offset Gnarlhorn's A3 and Paragon's A2 to maintain 100% uptime on the unkillable buff, so that whenever the boss hits, it's not killing anybody. And then the same thing is also true for Reliquary Tender. You want to make sure that her speeds are adjusted in proportion to the boss's speed, so that as the boss is climbing his speed, so is your Reliquary Tender, so she can stay right behind him whenever he's getting his turn to apply the AoE enfeeblement. She gets followed up with the cleanse. And I didn't do it like perfectly, like verbatim, but that would be the way I would suggest most players do it, so that they can maintain pretty much the core essence of this team, and then find their success. And then once they get to stage 25, they can lock in a build like what I'm showing you guys today, and just let it be the thing that they farm from then onwards. Now, if you don't have the blessings, unfortunately, this type of content is kind of predicated upon it. I'd say that the lower the stages, the easier it is for you to kind of make, maybe compensate for it. But I will warn everybody now, just like the changes they made to Sand Devils, for Phantom Shoguns, the higher up the stages you are, even from a lesser extract, which is with like lesser oils for accessories, for lack of better words, they're still better at the higher end side. So the higher you can go, the better for all sorts of, all the forms of different drops you can get for extract. So I will advise you that the better you can get to the higher stages, the quicker you can get to the higher stages, the better you're better off for it in terms of farming, and like, oils per energy ratio would be a little bit more effective. So the goal would be to get there, find the two, like, use whatever means you got to do. I will say, like, a little caveat, there were certain parts where, like, I was getting so close to killing the boss, but because my cooldowns were so low and I was struggling to keep up with, like, the shade counter, my 2 cold hearts were not enough. So I actually cycled out every now and then my Gina, who I use for Fire Knight at the moment. He's going at a pretty fast speed, and I would just offset using his ability so that he wouldn't apply too much shade counters before the cleanse. And then when the cleanse comes out, he's just AoEing with his A3, and he's just, cooking the boss's health, as well as bring the shade counter down. You could use and plug and play different DPS options. It doesn't have to be your cold hearts, but they were a great example for a showcase since they're rare. Voids, they're amongst some of the more easier champions to get, and I thought that would be a great way to showcase this particular this team comp. So with all that being said, I hope this helps you guys out. Remember, at the end of the day, it's maintaining unkillable, keeping your HP thresholds at a high range, following the speed tune, and then as you're climbing, you'll see a little bit of a variation. The key is Reliquary Tender or your cleanser following along suit with the speed of the boss, and then as you go up higher, you'll find that you'll get closer to that point where when you hit stage 25, lock in at 284 and you're good to go. That's pretty much it. And with that being said, I hope you guys like this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and always remember, stay ascended.
Quick to get the